Howdy, college football fans. That's a little tribute to the Heartland and my old home in the Lone Star State. And I just want to point this out. Those of you Sooner fans who are watching, you see this UT hat on my head. It's really just Big 12 themed. So I don't have an egg in the game for UT, nor am I, a Sooner lover or basher either. I just love all things college football. So as my mom used to tell me, today's a big day. Well, Mom, today is a Big 12 day, and we're privileged to be joined by Josh Neighbors, Twitter handle at @JoshNeighbors_, and he's from the Locked On Big 12 podcast. So listeners, what I like to do is during the entire year, I like to go around and find the most comprehensive podcast for each conference. And I can tell you, Josh's Locked On Big 12 podcast is by far the best for the Big 12 conference. What I like is he not only addresses the big issues and stories of the conference, but he gives a real college football aficionados like me what we want, the teams and the players, the analysis and the trends from what we saw last year and what we can expect to see this coming year, more than just the clicky stories of ridicule and red tape that some of the podcasts tend to give. So Josh, as a college football aficionado, it's a word I made up, I thank you for joining us on the show today, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I was the last couple of days, people have been saying, hey, this guy only likes OU in Texas. So I'll say what you just said. No, I am not just an OU in Texas guy. I love the entire conference. Obviously, we're sad that they're going. But yes, it's very excited. It should be a really competitive year, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and I still can't wrap my head around Texas, especially, and Oklahoma, leaving the Big 12 and going to the SEC. But as somebody who, like I said, who lived in the state of Texas for 11 years, I'm happy to see the Lone Star State rivalry come back by virtue of playing in that same conference with Texas and Texas A&M. So, all right, Josh, we're going to get right out of the gate here. So I'm going to give you, and I sent it to you off air, my predicted order of finish this year. And I just kind of want to hear your thoughts. And you don't have to address necessarily every team, but going from the top to the bottom. And again, feel free to send me the love or the hate online, fans. But I've got Oklahoma finishing first, followed by Texas. So I think those two will play not only in the Red River rivalry, and I can't believe I just said that without stumbling, but also in the Big 12 championship. I've got Oklahoma State 3, Baylor 4, very close. Kansas State 5, Iowa State 6, West Virginia and TCU at 7 and 8, and then Texas Tech and Kansas rounding out the Big 12. Josh, so as you looked at that and as you hear that, anything jump out to you as, okay, I can't believe he put them here, whether it be too high or too low? Give me your thoughts on that order of finish.
You and I actually are pretty similar. I have OU, I have Texas, I have Baylor then Oklahoma State, but I mean, it's not like 3-4 is 3-4, right?
Right.
That can be separated sometimes by tie break. I have Kansas State at 5. So I have them as kind of, I've been saying this, like that's the outside team that I wouldn't be shocked if they were in the Big 12 championship game. And their odds were like super long to start the year. It was like 42-1, I think it was, maybe, to win the Big 12. Something absurd like that. I don't think they should be that long.
And I, not to interrupt you, but I think I remember hearing on Bud Elliott on the Cover 3 podcast said that he took that to Vegas because of such a long shot, and he kind of likes what he sees in Kansas State. So, but go ahead.
There's a lot of volatility with this year's Big 12. So, I think Kansas State could definitely do it. 6 through 9, I submitted my ballot the other day. I forgot what order I put them, but it's kind of a crapshoot. 6 through 9 is another one of those categories where it's a bunch of 7-5 to 5-7 teams in that mix, sometimes lower. I put TCU at 9. I had them flip with Tech and West Virginia, I think. But look, I'm kind of, generally speaking, like my thoughts about the conference are kind of the same way yours are. And I think the one criticism that people like us have been, I know it's a criticism we've been getting, OU and Texas at the top. That is because it shows you how good Oklahoma's infrastructure is, that when you lose your coach in the dead of night, you get the guy who's been probably, considered the best coordinator in college football the last however long it is. Also, he happens to be a guy who used to coach for your school when you won a national championship. Right. And he comes and brings in one of the best offensive minds, maybe the best offensive mind that is not a head coach right now. In Jeff Levy, and there's reasons for that, the Baylor stuff, obviously, but he is a coordinator for them. And so you bring that in, you bring in a guy like Dylan Gabriel, you got some talent there already. Defense, let's see what happens, but he's a defensive mastermind, Brent Venables is. So if that's your version of a chaotic offseason, you're in really, really good shape. Also, their schedule's not that difficult. That's one thing I'm looking at, but I think people think there's a lot of upheaval there. So they're kind of concerned about what's happening. that's why people were thinking, well, OU's, maybe not top dog. But my question then would be like, who is then? Who is going to supplant them for number one? Baylor's schedule is pretty challenging, and they're switching quarterbacks and have lost a lot of pivotal players. Yes, both the lines are good. Oklahoma State lost their whole, basically their whole, a lot of their defense. Their defensive line's really good. They lost a lot of that defense. And then Texas is like the variance one, right? We really just don't know. I mean, there's so much talent there, and more talent than normal. This is not Tom Herman talent. Like, this is elite level talent, especially on offense. So I think they should be right up there at number 2 in the conference right now.
Yeah. And Texas every year for me, call me brand biased, but I feel like if I don't put Texas in the top 3 of the Big 12, it's going to come back and burn orange me. Yeah. Pun intended there, in a big way. I mean, like you said, maybe the most talented roster in the Big 12, and it might not even be as close as some people say. But again, I mean, Sarkisian has not wowed me as a head coach yet, even last year too. But in saying that, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see the Longhorns not only finish 1 or 2, but I wouldn't be shocked if they double dipped and beat OU twice in the same season. Not because I think that they're that much better than Oklahoma, but just because the talent level is there. So if they can answer some of those questions, and if Quinn Ewers can step in and be the guy that he's been hyped up to be, then they're in for something good.
I'm not even sure he needs to be like that guy. I think the one thing last year was they were playing ping pong with the quarterback position so much that it's like it didn't really, they weren't finishing games off.
No.
And they caused them, to go on that losing streak and not really know what what to do at quarterback. But like, I mean, they had the opportunities to win a lot of games last year and they didn't. And Steve Sarkisian promised to overhaul the roster, and he did. And he made those wholesale changes, brought an extra, some extra help on defense. Gary Patterson is there obviously now. Get the linebacker. They brought the linebacker in from JMU. They got some transfers also, obviously, on offense. And so, like this team. Here's the thing: is like people are like, "Oh, Texas back." You can say it like you have to evaluate every team differently. Like, some things are jokes, some things are trends, whatever. It's fun. Like this team, talent-wise, in this version of the Big 12, should be different. If this was last year's Big 12, where like Oklahoma State was that good defensively and Baylor could be, defensive juggernaut, they were like, maybe it's a different conversation. But there's no guarantees on that front. So if we're gonna have to go with talent and like. The only other team in my mind we could see up there is Kansas State. Like, I'm going to take Texas. I'm not going to take Adrian Martinez quarterback team to go up and be ahead of Texas. I'm going to take Texas and OU.
Sure. And just real quick before I move on to the next segment, I've heard a couple prognosticators put Oklahoma State in that top spot because, Gundy is clearly the dean of the conference, but the biggest loss for me for the Pokes is Jim Knowles is their defensive coordinator. Like, I consider him an A defensive coordinator, and no disrespect to Derek Mason, but I put him at a B- D coordinator at best, at least in year 1. And all those losses in the back 7, I think losing Malcolm Rodriguez was probably the biggest blow on that defense. I loved watching that guy play. It's going to be selfishly, I'm going to be selfishly sad not to see number 20 roaming sideline to sideline out there in Stillwater.
Yeah, well, you lose Malcolm Rodriguez, you lose Colby Harbell-Peel, you lose cornerbacks as well, and I mean you retain a lot of the defensive line. I'm a huge Derek Mason fan, so I'd probably put him a B+, A-. That defense for Auburn last year was awesome. They were really, really good defense. I would just say like there's a big adjustment he's going to have to make. They did lose a lot, especially in that linebacking core, and that's something they're going to have to deal with. Also, the thing is they're going to have to. They did a great job last year adapting their style of play, right? Like we think Mike Gundy, we think chucking it around. Well, last year's team was a run-first defensive football team. Like that's what they were. The problem for them is I don't know who's running the football for them, right? Like there's like, and the offensive line, not really sure about. Their quarterback was first team all Big 12 last year, but is, one of the most inconsistent quarterbacks that we have in his conference for sure. Yeah. So, and that's to say there's really high highs for him. Like that's the one thing. It's like, it's not like his high highs are bad. Like the Notre Dame game last year. Oh my God, he was awesome. Yeah. But like he lost Tay Martin too. And so, you lose your number 1 wide receiver as well. And like, you have to start thinking, okay, like what is this team going to look like? I'm sure they'll be fine. They'll probably win 8-9 games. It's just, there's a lot of moving parts. And if a transition year for you is 8-9 wins, it just shows you how good Mike Gundy is as a coach.
Yeah, no, that's a good place to be. So, all right. Who's overrated in your opinion? I mean, looking at some of the preseason magazines, hearing some of the other talking heads, who's a team that you hear people saying, I think that this team should be at the top, and you're like, I'm pumping the brakes on that one? Who's that for you?
Baylor. So I have them finishing, although I have them finishing third.
Yeah.
What we have to understand about Baylor is, so like when I say overrated, they're probably going to be a preseason top 25 team. They might deserve it, but what they've done, I mean, so when they make the quarterback switch to Blake Shapen, right? Yeah. What you're doing is admitting that this year you can't do what you did last year and succeed, right? You lost stuff on defense, Terrell Bernard and Jalen Petrie, like those guys, I think are going to have really good NFL careers because of how awesome players they were. And they lost some guys at cornerback as well. Like this is a really, it's going to be a good defense again, I think. But they lost Abram Smith, right? And so you're like, okay, you lose your running back. I know it came out of nowhere, but they're going to rely on guys they don't really know, with a quarterback who has played one really good half of football and one not so good half of football. And so this is a team that I think, I know all teams get better, but I think in November might be could definitely be a top 20 team. Playing like a top 20 team is what I mean to say. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that like they are going to be throughout. So I think when you have a difficult schedule like they have, and you're going to be kind of proving yourself, learn on the fly a little bit for them, things could be difficult for them, but I don't think it's going to be embarrassing. It's just going to be like, all right, we have to, Baylor's done an awesome job staying towards the top. They're doing a great job. Actually, no matter who the coach is, Bryles, Matt Rule, and then now Dave Aranda. They've done a really good job staying towards top. But like there can be small dips in there, which is okay. I just think they're going to be in one of those right now. They have to make sure they get everything trending back in the right direction. I think they will, but I think if you're putting them like preseason top 20, I'm not there with you on that.
I've even seen them as high as top 10, and that's what kind of blows me away. And that's why I put them as my most overrated team as well. So we're 1 for 1 on that. I mean, and we were pretty close on our predicted standings too. But yeah, you replace those running backs, the wide receivers. I like Blake Shapen, but he's going to have to do a lot on his own kind of early. And I think the saving grace for that offense is Jeff Grimes, one of the most underrated offensive coordinators in college football. But then they lost a big part of their secondary as well on defense, and their schedule. They play at a good BYU team in week 2, and that's going to be tough. Especially since, Baylor beat the Cougars at home last year. Okie State early in a tough spot. West Virginia can be tricky. Kansas State, we know, is a tough out, even though Baylor's beaten the Wildcats 4 straight years. And then they have to play at Oklahoma and at Texas as well. So, yeah, Baylor's my pick for overrated in that regard as well. So let's go to the other side, underrated. Who's a team that maybe should be giving more or be given more love and maybe will surprise people in a good way?
So, I mean, I guess I have to go. I'm like the least Taylor Martinez person in the world. I really just do. I really struggle with him watching him last year. Everybody's like, oh, this team's 3-9 and they're the best 3. Like, okay, you lost all the games, and he's a reason why, because he can't take care of the football. That being said, I love Deuce Vaughn. I love both their wide receivers, Brooks and Knowles. I think their tight end Matt Bebe is pretty good too. Their offensive line should be pretty good this year. Their defensive line should be pretty good this year. Their linebacking core should be pretty good this year. The secondary's got a lot of size as well. So I think that's the team Vegas is low selling them. Here's the thing. When you play like Kansas State does, they really do. They actually hit a lot of explosive plays last year, but their pace was one of the slowest in FBS. Slowest does not always mean worst, but they had one of the slowest paces. So when you play slowly, what that means is you can look at this 2 ways. Either one, you have to take care of your possessions, right? And so that says, okay, Adrian Martinez turns the ball over a lot. All right. That's not good if he has less possessions, could be more turnovers, or you could say, hey, less possessions, that means less opportunities to turn the football over. It could work either way there. So that's why my hesitancy is that at the most important position, they're replacing a guy in Skylar Thompson who is a rock for them and consistent with a guy who really has not been consistent. That's what you need at that quarterback spot. Like that job this year is to get the football to playmakers and allow the Brookses, the Knowles, and the Deuce Vaughns to make the plays in space, take care of the football, maybe hit those big explosive plays when you can. We'll see. We'll see if he and he's got a really good guy to teach him how to play Kansas State quarterback in Colin Klein, a really good, awesome asset. We'll see. We'll see those. So this is the team that I have my eye on, Kansas State, because I really don't like. People want to sell me on West Virginia. I just cannot do it. I really cannot do it. People,
No.
Iowa State, Matt Campbell, like, maybe. Texas Tech's got a lot of talent on offense. Thing is, their schedule is really, really difficult, and they're kind of in a transition period. And I'm not really sure who's playing wide receiver for them this season. So I think that's why I land on Kansas State as the team that we're underselling, because I'm saying I have them fifth, but like also I wouldn't be surprised if they're in the championship game. So that kind of tells you, even I'm underselling them, I guess, too.
So I think I need to up my anti-hacking software because we are like 3 for 3 now. So I have Kansas State right here, clear as day. I wish I had the knowledge to share my screen with the viewers here. But so here's what I said. Many are picking them around anywhere from 4 to 6 in the Big 12. But I think the addition of Martinez is good because he's a good complement to Deuce Vaughn, Malik Knowles, and Phillip Brooks. And all those guys are a much better supporting cast than he had at Nebraska, even when they had Wan'Dale Robinson, even when Maurice Washington was kind of that flash in the pan good in the early part. But then you touched on the biggest one. Colin Klein is the new offense coordinator. I am most excited to see him entrenched at the play calling position, maybe more than any other offensive coordinator in college football, at least the new ones that are in there. And there's been a lot. I think like almost 50% of OCs in the Power 5 are new this year or first year. They also have 2.5 offensive line starters returning. I mean, if you include Poitier coming back from injury, the defense will be a lot better than people will think. And there's a lot of experience on that defense as well. They played Oklahoma close, winning 2 of the last 3, and 4 of the last 5 have been decided by a touchdown or less. So, yeah, I would not be surprised to see Kansas State playing in the Big 12 title game if they can get, 1 or 2 of those, questionable games to go their way. So, yep, right there with you.
Yeah.
Right,
and also, one more thing about Adrian Martinez, like he's like a pretty good player. Like the thing is, like, I'm not saying he's not a good quarterback. It's just the mistakes are crippling. Like Carson, it's a kind of a Carson Wentz type deal. Like Carson Wentz is extremely gifted, extremely talented, but there's sometimes you're just like, what are we doing? Like what?
Yeah.
And so for him, it happens almost like twice a game. I mean, his touchdown to interception ratio is never it's never really that impressive. I mean, like, 17-8 was fine, but 10-9, 4-3, and 14-10. And also it's got a massive fumbling problem. So that's why I'm there on that.
Sure. All right, we'll go into the players now specifically, and I will, full disclosure, on my way back home this morning, I was listening to your most recent Locked On Big 12 podcast, and so I heard you kind of talking about some of the players of the year. So I hate to break your heart, but we're going to agree here on the offensive player of the year. I know who you're going to say, but tell the listeners again, who is the most talented offensive player in the Big 12 this season?
The most talented one is Bijan Robinson. The one I have picked for to win player of the year is Deuce Vaughn on my ballot.
Okay.
That's who I picked because I call him the 4 down back. That's what I call him.
Yeah. And I think that's a great assessment. I'm actually going to go with Dylan Gabriel here. And I love Deuce Vaughn, the most versatile player in the Big 12. I agree with you. The most talented is Bijan Robinson. And it was very close. It's really splitting hairs between Bijan, Deuce, and then my pick, Dylan Gabriel. But, he's got a quick release and the ability to throw his guys open. He's going to make his core of pass catchers who people are kind of bringing down a peg because they lost Mario Williams because, all the things that are going on there.
Jaden Hazelwood too is gone.
Yeah, Hazelwood's the other one, right. But they still have a talented group of receivers in that room. Plus, like you touched on earlier, Jeff Lebby produces his quarterbacks. I mean, Matt Corral at Ole Miss, Mackenzie Milton at UCF. He has a way of making things work for his quarterback. And because I picked Oklahoma to be at the top of the league, that's really what was the deciding factor. I think that Vaughn has complementary players in Adrian Martinez if he can, clean up the miscues like you talked about, and then Knowles and Brooks. And then Bijan has Xavier Worthy, Isaiah Nair coming in. I think that Ewers or Hudson Card, whoever solidifies that job, is going to do well in that offense. And Roshan Johnson playing behind him. So I think Dylan Gabriel is going to have a more impressive year if he can take the Sooners back to the top of the Big 12, because it'll look on paper like he did it mostly on his own without as much help as those other players.
Yeah, I picked him for my newcomer of the year. So he's on my, he's on my ballot and he's also my first team quarterback. So like, I think when you take those 3 guys, I think it's, it's a really compelling conversation. I mean, the thing that Deuce will have going against him is like, if they don't win that, as many games, and a guy like Dylan Gabriel, Bijan Robinson lights it up and they win 9-10 games, then you're probably going to go with that guy, if it's pretty close. So, that's kind of how the voting things go. I think what impressed me so much about Deuce Vaughn last year was that Kansas State team cycled through quarterbacks like crazy. The one thing that didn't change was his level of play, and the quality of play next to him was very much hit or miss, but he was awesome like the entire time. And so that to me, like, that's why I would say, even if he were to do that again this year and, Dylan Gabriel has a nice season, I'd still lean towards Deuce Vaughn, because I'd be saying, well, who is the best player, kind of, especially given the circumstances, I would take Deuce in that situation. So it's just a matter of what you value. Right. And if Dylan Gabriel, tosses around and takes Oklahoma to the Big 12 championship game, can't argue with that at all. I think it's just a matter of, the context of it. You have to see kind of where things shake out, where they land.
Yeah, and I can promise you, you will not hear a peep of argument from me when anybody says Deuce Vaughn is Offensive Player of the Year, because I love watching that guy play, especially at his stature and what a big time back he is. Because a lot of times people have this misunderstanding that he's like this jitterbug who's like just going to run around people. Like he can bring the lumber, and he's got some strong legs and low center of gravity. Yeah. So, well, you touched on your newcomer of the year with Gabriel. I actually went with Adrian Martinez. And I put it this way. So 64% career passing percentage. He throws a good ball. Obviously, he needs to cut down on his turnovers, both fumbling and throwing picks. But I think, like I talked about earlier, he's really going to benefit from having Deuce's versatility, Brooks as a solid receiver, and then Knowles' big playability, not to mention Cade Warner, who was a former teammate of his out in Lincoln. But again, what I really like about Adrian Martinez being able to shine as the newcomer of the year this year is having Colin Klein as his offensive play caller. So let's go to the defensive side. So we talked about offensive defensive player of the year. Tell us who your defensive player of the year is, and I bet you I'm going to shock you with mine.
So I picked Siaki Ika. The numbers for him are not going to be as good as, I know the other one people were picking is Felix Enodike Uzama from Kansas State, is a tremendous pass rusher. But to me, Siaki Ika is the guy we're all looking at in terms of draft stuff. He plays a different position. He plays a position where, like we talked about Jordan Davis for Heisman last year. And if you went to Jordan Davis's stats, like that's not where the Heisman case lies, right? You have to watch, what does it require to block an elite interior defensive lineman? Well, it takes more than one person, but what does that do? That frees things up for everybody else around you and behind you. And that's the job. You're they call the guys in the offensive line road graders, right? That's kind of the same way. Like your job is to pave the way for the guys behind you. Sure, you want to, make some plays as well, but like if it takes two guys to block you, then that's going to F things up for the defense, right? Or for the offense, excuse me. And so that's kind of where I see his value. And I think he's got the chance to be the ultimate disruptor in the conference this year and really push his way up the draft boards, because the physical talent for Siaki Ika is 100% there.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where I almost went with Dylan Doyle as my defensive player of the year, just because he'll be freed up from not only, Aki, but also Jackson Player coming in if they like to go two big guys inside and they play a little bit more of an even four-man front. I know that they're primarily a three-man front team, but I actually went with Daniel Green from Kansas State. So I think he's a very underrated linebacker. So 89 tackles a year ago, 13 TFLs, 3 sacks, and 4 quarterback hurries. But I think the biggest thing is he's going to benefit most from the players in front of him. You mentioned Felix. I think Khalid Duke, if he's healthy again this year, those are two great bookends. And then he's got a good secondary behind him as well. And he's going to be joined by Will Honus transferring over from Nebraska. I really liked Honus out for the Cornhuskers. And D coordinator Joe Klanderman does a good job, especially against some of the bigger boys on the schedule. Green has 2.5 years of experience that'll help him. So I know that's a little bit, and it's not a clicky pick. It's one that I mulled over for about an hour this morning. I'm like, you know what? My gut is telling me that Daniel Green, if Kansas State performs as well defensively as I think that they will, that just was it for me. And again, I agree. If you're going on just pure what they bring to their defense, it's your guy 100%. But because I am influenced by stats and by what your versatility is, Green is a tackler. He's a good run stopper, but he can also contribute in pass defense as well.
And I have him on my first team defense. I have him next to Doyle at the linebacker spot, and then also DeMarvion Overshown. So that would not be surprising. I think he's on that defense. The problem is he's not the best player on his defense. Like I do think Enodike Uzama is the best player on that defense, just because he is such a game disruptor, and we saw it happen last year. So I think that's kind of why I would, if I had to pick a guy from there, I would go that way. But also, I have 3 Kansas State players on my first team all defense, so like I wouldn't be shocked if any of those guys.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can't go wrong with any of those. What about a watch me player? Somebody that, as you watched and covered the Big 12 last year and coming into this year, like I'm still not seeing their name mentioned, or I'm not hearing them talked about a lot. Who stands out to you as somebody that fans will know a lot better after 2023 or after 2022?
So Kenny Logan is safety. He plays for Kansas. People don't give him a lot of respect because he plays for Kansas, but watch Kenny Logan. There's that. So I'll actually go another Kansas State guy. Julius Brents is like gigantic. He's like a really big dude. I think it's like he played safety at Iowa State before he came to Kansas State. And so I think it's really, I'm really curious to see what he looks like this year. They use him kind of in a hybrid spot. He's going to play corner. Like I'm really excited to see him. And I think he's got a chance behind the guys that we talked about to make some plays if those guys can force the action up ahead. And so I think, maybe that'll be an interesting guy to watch on the defensive side. Another guy I want people to know their name. I'll go another Kansas player. Let's go offense here. Kai Thomas, Minnesota transfer, comes in at running back for KU. KU, in my opinion, has the second best running back tandem in the league, or running back group in the league. And I think it's a good margin. They have Devin Neal, who was really good last year. Numbers don't jump out at you because it's hard when you're playing for KU. The blocking is not always going to be great, so your numbers can get a little, kind of deflated. But awesome games against OU and Texas last year for Devin Neal, and they bring in Kai Thomas, who was a horse for them last year after Muhammad Ibrahim goes down for Minnesota. He comes in, so I think Kai Thomas can have an opportunity to be I mean, he's probably the second best offensive player that they have next to Devin Neal on that team this year. So I think both those guys can get plenty of run this season. I'm excited to see those two. So I will say on the defense, give you a little Kenny Logan, Julius Brents, and then we'll also go with Kai Thomas as well at running back for. Yeah,
and he's got an experienced offensive line coming back too, and we know Lance Leipold, makes his
plays to his strengths. That is what he does. He plays to his strengths, and that's the strength this year.
Yeah, I'm going to go on the defensive side. Tyree Wilson, DN from Texas Tech. Now, I was really impressed at the latter part of his 2021 season. So he finished with 38 tackles, 7 sacks, 6.5 TFLs, 5 quarterback hurries. He's 6'6", 280, and he's got a pretty good linebacker behind him in Krishan Merriweather, and an even more experienced and a pretty solid secondary behind that. Plus, I like new D coordinator Tim DeRuiter. I thought that was a big hire for Joey McGuire. And he's, respected. He's a reputable D coordinator, and Tyree Wilson in the bowl game was really, really tough to block. So he's somebody that I think could pop on this year. If
he's big too, man. He's like 6'6", like 275, I think. He's a big kid.
Yeah, he's a big dude. So, all right. One other thing we like to touch on is home field advantage. So, watching the games, I don't know how many of these stadiums you've been to, but from what you can see on TV, what you've seen maybe in person, who do you think has the best home field advantage in the Big 12 Conference?
I think Stillwater right now is a huge home field advantage.
I look that way because that's exactly who I'm going with. So I'm curious to hear what stands out to you, and I'll give you my reasons as well.
I just think being so consistently good pays off with attendance. I mean, that, they've been rewarded with really good crowds. And I mean, last year, it's tough place. I think they went undefeated at home last year. The losses at Iowa State. Yeah. And then, so I think that stands out to me for sure. Obviously, anytime you go to OU, it's a really difficult place to go win a football game. Yeah. McLean Stadium for Baylor looks beautiful. I just don't know how. Oh yeah. I don't know if it's a tremendous home field advantage just yet. I think it's becoming one. I think definitely it's becoming one. But I would say if I had to go with one right now, and then Jack Trice. I mean, Jack Trice is up there. But I would say right now, quality plus the team kind of is good, so the advantage is good. I would go Stillwater right now. Boone Pickens would be my number one. I'd say Jack Trice is probably number 2 because it's just as an advantage. It's a pretty awesome advantage.
Sure. Yeah. No, that atmosphere at Jack Trice has gotten better and better, and a big part thanks to Matt Campbell. So I put Okie State. So the paddle people that are right on top of you. I mean, I love watching that and hearing that, just the pounding against the padding there. The waving back and forth during the fight song. Oklahoma State, has the number 2 home record in the Big 12 since 2015. They're 34-11. And since 2018, and this jumped out at me, I just found this out this morning, 8-2 against ranked opponents at home. It's got to be near the top in the conference. 3-1 against top 10 teams in that span. So when opportunities put in front of them, they take full advantage of it. Whereas other teams who maybe win the games they're supposed to at home, sometimes they let the the quote unquote bigger games slip through. So yeah, absolutely, Boone Pickett Stadium in Stillwater is my choice as well. So we're gonna kind of finish here quickly, Josh. And again, I really love having you on, man. But we're gonna do some quick word association. So I'm gonna give you 3 coaches and 2 programs, and I didn't give it to you ahead of time because I want like the first word or first thought out of your mouth when you hear them. Good for that?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. So Brent Venables.
Defense.
Okay. Mike Gundy.
Adaptable.
Okay. I was going to go with mullet, but Steve Sarkisian.
Playmakers.
Yeah, I like that. All right. So now 2 programs. Iowa State.
Matt Campbell.
Okay. West Virginia.
Tough spot.
Yeah. That's a good one. I like that. Cool, man. Yeah, I wanted to end with something. I mean, the whole interview was fun. I mean, this is probably one of the most fun 35 minutes of college football talk that I've had. So one of the reasons I love listening to your show, Josh, is, and again, fans, that's the Locked On Big 12 podcast. So give them a listen if you don't already. Subscribe. But it's like you're just a guy who's talking college football with friends. And that's honestly what I thought we had right now. It wasn't like scripted. It wasn't just, so what do you think about this? And that's really what I think every college football fan wants to hear. And that's essentially what we were doing, man. It's a great work. So, but the great thing is he's actually a professional, ladies and gentlemen, who does the work too. So keep up the bigs on the Big 12, brother. You want to remind everybody about where they can find out what you do and tell them a little about yourself?
Yeah, so you guys, I also am a producer for Sirius XM. I produce on their college channels and also a little bit of NASCAR as well recently. You guys can find me on Twitter at @JoshNeighbors_. Find the show at LO Big 12, and Locked On Big 12 is wherever you guys get your podcasts, and on YouTube as well. Subscribe. We're trying to get to 1,000 before the start of the football season. We're at 905, I think, right now. So trying to get to 1K before we start CFB season 2022. And Tim, thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. And I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that the people out there who are on the fence, they're going to be well entertained by subscribing, man. So, all right, there you have it. Once again, this is the CFP podcast. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and visit our website, cfpcollegefootball.com. And if you're looking for lots of college football spots, that's the place to go. So thanks for listening. Adios on the Brazos.